academic research, and my supervisor said, look, there probably isn't very much, so don't get your hopes up. Because nobody's really looked at women at that point in the anti-war movement, apart from perhaps a few well-known people, perhaps like Eleanor Snowden, Catherine Bruce Glazier, all of whom have links to this wonderful building. So when I began to look in Manchester, of course, there's a huge network of women that come together as the war is declared. So you have suffrage women, suffragists mostly, who are non-violent women, but you also get women leaving the Women's Social and Political Union because Mrs. Pankhurst is a supporter of the war, and those women begin to leave, and that fractures, it fractures really, the war fractures the suffrage movement in general. So you have women moving away from the main suffrage movements and forming different kinds of organisations. And I began to be interested as well, and really because of work Jill Liddington had done about peace, I noticed very early on that we had something called a Women's Peace Crusade in Manchester, and it had been stopped by the police. Don't know if people know Manchester, there's a wonderful square called Stevenson Square in the Northern Quarter, and that's where there used to be the kind of traditional place for demonstrations. So I decided to look into that, and really out of that grew my absolute interest in the Women's Peace Crusade. So the Women's Peace Crusade was started in 1916, you can read about it outside. Really by women who had or were already involved in lots of anti-war initiatives. So you've got socialist women, suffrage women, pacifist women like Quakers. You've also got women who may describe themselves as anarchists. You have women that generally before the war would have kept away from each other largely, more or less. And the war brings them together in cities like Manchester, and in smaller towns like Nelson. I mean, in Nelson, I think what I think is you've got those networks happening already. And I think that's something that people forget. The suffrage movement, the National Union, you've got the wonderful banner upstairs, had formed a very informal alliance with the Labour Party in 1912. And it had begun to work with women in the northern towns like Nelson, Blackburn, Accrington. People like Ellen Wilkinson were coming up here to persuade women why they should think about needing the vote. So it was very much a kind of, there was this link with the left that is quite often, you know, we think of Mrs. Pankhurst as being the champion of the working class, but I would dispute that personally. And I would say that it's the suffragists who were really trying to galvanise the working class women into thinking about politics. I'm glad you.
No, I wouldn't disagree with that at all.
You know, but the kind of popular narrative is that Annie Kenney is the one kind of, you know, held up as the working class heroine in that situation. So began to do some work about the Women's Peace Crusade, and discovered, of course, that there were 123 Women's Peace Crusades between 1917 and 1918. Right across the country. And these crusades are getting sort of 2,000 or 3,000 women out on the street. They had their own badges, they had their own banners. None of these have survived. They had their own leaflets. So they were handing out things like this on the street. I'll pass them round if you like. I think they've got more of them here as well. So women were very well organised, and they began to have a column in the Labour Leader, which is kind of a radical newspaper at the time. And what I've discovered, I've been researching a woman that's become a kind of favourite of mine, whose husband was Wormwood Scrub. She lived in Manchester, and she decided to walk to London from Manchester via Priest Heath in Cheshire to hand out leaflets on the way, these kind of leaflets. And she was put up in Cheshire by a woman who wrote to her in Manchester and said, I've been reading the Labour Leader, in a small town like Whitchurch, you know, you have to think that this was the kind of Facebook of its day. People were reading those papers, and this letter is so interesting. It says things like, I'm really trying to think about the way the national press is telling me propaganda about Germany, and I'm trying to think that there's another way of looking at things. This is just, I'm not going to say just an ordinary woman, but you know, she's not a political woman, the woman in Whitchurch, okay? She puts the two women who are leafleting up, and they all get arrested and sent to prison. I mean, that's the other thing, that we always remember that suffragettes are sent to prison, but during the war a number of women were sent to prison for handing out leaflets like this, for printing material. So as the men are combed out from various places and sent to prison for not going to war, the women take on the roles, and I think that's what's been forgotten really. It's a short moment of time, of course, it's a war, and that brings me really to Nelson. So what happened was that I met the marvellous Charlotte Bill in about 1920, sorry, I live in the past, in about 2014. We were doing a film, she was making a film about the Women's International League, which was an organisation set up by women at the outbreak of war, which was very clearly wanting to politicise women about the war. People are talking about the capitalist war, they're talking about the arms trade. You read some of the stuff and you think this could be written today, all right? Very, I mean, perhaps slightly more formal language, but they are thinking about exactly the same kind of things. And these women wanted to go to The Hague to meet their sisters from across Europe to talk about war, and Winston Churchill closed the channels, so the British delegation could never get there. And Charlotte made a film, you can watch it on YouTube, it's called These Dangerous Women. So that's how I got to know...
there's a book upstairs if you want to have a look, it's on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to write some of these down while what you're saying.
And so Charlotte and I got together, and Charlotte said to me, have you got any ideas for another film? Always a dangerous thing to say to me, because I've got loads of ideas about what we could do. So I said, why don't we do something about the Women's Peace Crusade? And we got some money from somewhere, I don't know, one of those heritage lotteries, something like that. I'm not very good at money. And we decided to get volunteers together from East Lancashire, which is how I met Sue, and Lizzie there in the corner, and we had women volunteers from Rochdale, Oldham, Blackburn, Burnley, Nelson, Manchester, and we used to meet together in Central Library in Manchester. They gave us the librarian's room. It was a bit like this, but even more, and we felt very important.
We did. We got to see all this important archive.
Yeah, they brought out the archives, and we made a book. I think it's completely sold out, but you can have a look.
There's one
So
upstairs.
this is the book, and we looked at the women that were involved in. It's called the Women's Peace Crusade. Just that's the clue.
Make a note of them upstairs. I'll show
Right,
you.
yeah, thank you, because I can read these.
And of course, what we found was that in Nelson, because you've got this enormously strong left-wing, anti-militarist, anti-war movement, that the women themselves are well organised, all right? And the women know each other. I think you're saying, you know, people are related, people know each other. And you've got the wonderful Selina Cooper. But you've got other wonderful people as well. One of our favourites is a woman who lived in the next street.
Nancy Shimble.
Nancy Shimble! What a name to come to. So, the Peace Crusade in Nelson, as it says on the boards outside, was held in memory of Nancy Shimbles, who died when she was 38 from, I think, appendicitis or something quite simple. Nancy Shimbles regarded herself as an internationalist, as a socialist. She's a trade unionist. She's in the Weavers. She's in the Weavers Association.
Weavers Union.
the Weavers Union. She's and she was about to be a delegate for the ILP when she died. And you find, I think, that at her funeral.
She's not our cousin, by the way.
But I think there were, and I may be wrong, Jack, but I think there were definitely flowers sent from the Wellocks to her funeral.
Yes.
You know, so
Yes.
you know you can see this
Yeah.
kind of very strong network.
Yeah, very affectionate memories of her in these articles that we found, didn't we? Yeah.
Yeah, that there she is. So
Yeah,
So the Peace Crusade in Nelson, I mean, you can see out there that the people here have found such wonderful archive material in the local papers about the debate about whether there should be a Peace Crusade, where it was going to be, how it was going to be stewarded and things like that. So in 2017, we
Yes.
made a
I
film.
think it was that year.
Yeah.
We made a film.
Well, it might have been 2016.
book and
we
the
might have
film.
started.
We made a
Or
book
not.
and a film.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well done.
I haven't made a film.
Yeah, and
We're not telling you. I haven't made a
Still
film.
time.
yeah, it will be on telly. I've just got to get that awful man, what's it called, Julian Fellows, to be interested in peace. It's unlikely. Okay, it's better than Downton Abbey, isn't it? So what we discovered was you've got wonderful women. You've got Gertrude Ingham, and we could trace some of these women, a bit like what Cyril's done, because Ethel Snowden, who is a Nelson woman, married Philip Snowden, who's the Labour MP for Blackburn. I don't know, was he an objector? I don't
He
know.
was too old, of course he was,
It's beyond the age.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was also not well, I mean,
Yeah.
whether
So-
his back was broken or whatever, it was difficult moving.
But they
So-
opened the building, didn't they, Philip and Ethel Snowden? They were here in
Yes,
this
they were.
building at the
Yes.
grand opening.
Yeah. So Ethel Snowden, from 1917, edits a column in the Labour Leader, and in that column they put down who the secretaries are of all the Women's Peace Crusade. So you can begin to track the women, rather in the way that your database has done.
Yeah.
So Gertrude Ingham, whose son Alex was a conscientious objector.
Alec Ingham, well known.
Cousin?
No, no, he wasn't my uncle. Alec.
So Gertrude Ingham and Selina Cooper, very important in galvanising the Peace Crusade here. They would have meetings, I think, here and also in the Weavers building, I think. And what you find in August of 1917, they have this enormous demonstration that goes down Manchester Road. And the reason that it's become quite an important thing is that they met with a huge amount of opposition. So, you know, these women were probably spat upon, they had things thrown at them. You
Sods
know,
were thrown.
Yeah.
I think it says in the red. Sods were thrown.
when the sods were thrown. And also I read there, which I didn't realise just from looking at that today, that when the crusade finished or was dispersed, the anti-crusade people came to this building and threw things at this building. So there's a great deal of passion on both sides about what was happening. So that's really what I've been involved in. So I've been involved really in uncovering the ordinary woman, all right? The women that are forgotten, much like you, the work you've been doing. The ordinary men who don't go to war. The women who decide that they're going to make a stand against war. So I uncovered one woman who I've become very fond of as well. This is a woman called Deborah Smith. And she was I don't know, she's one of the early, there's a picture of her in this book. She's one of the early women in the Clarion movement. Cousin?
I don't know.
She's cousin.
By the way, while you're looking, Sylvia Pankhurst
Yeah.
has spoken from above in that main room.
Has she really?
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
what was the stage up
Yeah.
there, yeah.
And I was just saying to Gary earlier that you've got there that the women's, on that demonstration, the Workers' Suffrage Socialist Federation, which had changed from the Women's Suffrage Federation, which was Sylvia's organisation, they had a small branch in Nelson, and that needs to be looked at. This is a very radical, revolutionary kind of branch that Sylvia was heading up. I think the woman that was the secretary lived on Railway Street, so and they had a banner on that demonstration about, you know, we want peace. You have to remember as well that 1917 was the time of the first Russian Revolution, and for a lot of people on the left and people who were anti-war, this was an enormous thing. You know, people really believed, they really believed that there was an opportunity for life to be different, for governments to be run in a different way. And I think we forget that because it's kind of overshadowed by what happened later.
Yeah.
So in Manchester, and I don't know if it happened here, but in Manchester and in various places, they tried to set up embryonic workers and soldiers councils in the form of the Russian model, the Soviet models, but they didn't last very long. My own feeling is that Britain isn't a very revolutionary country. We like a nice cup of tea. And, you know, I think that for me is what it's about. So I've got some work, I did some work about the wonderful Deborah Smith. So Deborah Smith is a weaver. She becomes very involved in the Clarion. All her children and herself, they all work in the mills. But her son Rene, and I was talking to Cyril, I don't know why, but Rene goes on to work in the council. He's involved in trade union matters. And he goes to Ruskin College, which is the kind of college for the working class. And he goes on a trade union delegation to Berlin in 1914, and as war breaks out, he is then interned as a prisoner of war. So what we find with Deborah Smith is she's got one son interned as a prisoner of war, she's got one son on the front. And obviously she then becomes involved in the peace movement. And Rene Smith, when he comes back from, I don't think he's interned for very long because he's not fighting, so I don't quite know what he does for the rest of the war, perhaps works in the council. He doesn't go to war, but he then goes to work in Denmark in a kind of community college, and he comes back to England, becomes a Labour MP. And I think for me what's very interesting is that you can see how the war affected women, not only because of the hardship of war, but for a lot of women, I think it opened their eyes as well politically about what was going on. I mean, about things like the arms trade, about the increasing militarisation in schools, children being made to do army drills, the same arguments that we're having today, really. So I love Nelson, and I've come up here loads. We did a wonderful film. You have to watch it. I mean, it was really good fun. And talking of Margaret Gardens, just before I go, people know me. I could carry on talking. Me and Cyril, we could talk all day. Arthur Winterbottom. There's somebody here who'd come from Oldham. Arthur Winterbottom was a conscientious objector, but he was sent to work on a market garden. Instead of going to prison. And I think Dorothy Bentley's been in touch with you about Arthur Winterbottom. And his sister, the wonderfully named Elsie Winterbottom, was secretary of the local Women's International League and the local Women's Peace Crusade in Oldham. But after the war, Arthur ran a market garden down in Congleton. So again, we've got this stuff about the land.
Can I just interject? We've got a fantastic actor upstairs who's wanting to do a performance of one of Selina Cooper's real speeches.
Okay.
So I'd like to invite you all to come upstairs.
Okay. And that is.
But I do love the talk. I was waiting for a good moment. I was thinking, okay, market garden, cut.
I'm trying with my phone going off. That could have
That
been
was
the
a
moment.
very subtle. I thought, right, so if you would please like to come upstairs, and we can carry on talking
I'm not sure
as we
got
go.
one.
I'm just going to go and warm the actor.